these belief systems and the efficiency has found its way into the church itself. And the church, I think, has become a propagator of that. And it's become a bit of a Trojan horse. You know, the modernity has come in and really kind of destroyed them from the outside, even though they talk about making disciples and doing it the best way. But implicit within that are those seeds of destruction that the church is, I think, sown and not realize it. And I think COVID brought that to bear, because suddenly people disappeared from church and now they're not coming back because they haven't understood the dynamic, the essential nature of relationships and embodiment within the church. And to me, that's just a product of modernity. The reason that people have stayed away is because they have never been taught how needed the church is and essential. It's just, give me Jesus. I've prayed the prayer. I've gotten saved. And I'm good. And you're seeing that within the Southeast right now. I mean, within the proverbial Bible Belt. Russell Moore ran an article, I think it came out the day before yesterday, on the South, and a lot of people that are leaving the church in the South, they're maintaining a lot of their convictions on some things like abortion, but they're not on premarital sex or living together, and even the essential nature of going to church. So what I like about your thesis is you're bringing it back in, saying you're not your own. You don't have, I mean, there is a freedom in not being your own and having to choose all these things. Like you said, limitless freedom is unbearable. It's freedom with limits. It's also an understanding that you have a responsibility and that you belong not only to God, but to a people. And you're engaged with that people. And that's what I found to be so illuminating as you've written, not being our own, but belonging to Christ. I'm trying to find this other part in here, because you had so many different pieces and so many things to bring out. But you mentioned here, talking about technique. I want to go back to technique for a minute, because some people will say, well, what's wrong though with technique? And as you said, efficiency isn't always, it's not a bad thing. But it's not the only thing. And you mentioned defining the problem, explaining why it exists, develop a targeted solution. This isn't you saying that we need to do this. This is how we have gone about it. And implement the solution. And the idea is we think there's a solution to every problem, or there's a one way to do everything. And there's not always one way. Like I tell people, only God was a perfect parent and we still rebel. You know, so there's not this, but I hear people say that. Like, I thought I had one woman tell me, she was my hygienist, my dental hygienist. And she fully said, I was told that if I homeschooled my kids, they would they would go to heaven, basically. And I know that seems extreme, but her children had both rebelled. And I thought to myself, I'm like, there's not just one way to do it. I've seen other parents come to me and they say, well, this is a biblical parenting model. What biblical parenting model is it? I don't remember Jesus giving us a biblical parenting model. And I asked one guy to tell me, I said, what is this biblical parenting model? And his children are grown now, but he said, well, there's a blanket and you put the child on the blanket. And so they understand limits. And I'm like, oh, where's that at in scripture? There's nowhere that this stuff is in there, but everybody just slaps this biblical label on it, as if this is the biblical idea of parenting. Yes, the Bible teaches individual responsibility. It teaches leading people, being there for them, loving them, encouraging, forgiving them. But a blanket or one form of school is going to be the determiner of your child's future. That's just an unbearable. I mean, it's not true. It's not biblical at all. So with you seeing a lot of that, I mean, how do you I don't want to say, how do you respond? I mean, you responded by writing a book, but why is it, I guess, that we need to know that we are not our own? I mean, I've elaborated on it, but I want you to describe it a little bit more.
You know, that passage you read, if I remember the context, I'm actually talking about the fact that I can't actually give a 5-step plan to fixing society. This is one of the most challenging parts of the book, is that once you accept that you are not your own, it gives you peace. And this is something you mentioned earlier. Society's still going to pressure you. So here's an example. Let's say you have a stay-at-home mom who's highly educated, somebody who could have a career, but she understands the value, and just for various life reasons, it's great to work, but for various life reasons, she's choosing to stay home. And she knows that it's a beautiful thing to stay home with your children, and that's a choice that she's making, that their family is making, and it's God honoring, and that she's no less of a person for staying home with her children, that having a career doesn't make her doesn't give her identity, that it doesn't define her, that it's not the one thing that's going to give her worth. That her worth is in God, belonging to God. Her identity is grounded in God's love for her, these sorts of things. But the fact is that when she goes and she meets other adults, it's not going to be uncommon for even people who in theory love the idea of stay-at-home moms, who think maybe that women should stay at home and shouldn't have jobs. It's not going to be uncommon for them when they meet her, other women, in fact, to say, what do you do? When she says, oh, I stay home with the kids. Oh, that's great. So what does your husband do? And there to be this sort of flip it, just sort of, there's nothing interesting about you, and that adds up. That adds up to this kind of pressure, which is what you described. So even when you can internalize and you can acknowledge and you can accept, okay, my identity is grounded in God's witness to my existence in the world. My purpose is grounded in God's love for me and his acknowledgement and the purpose he has given for me. I get my meaning from God, my value, all these sorts of things. Society is still going to be saying, tap, tap, hey, you know what? Pick up this burden, pick up this boulder, put it back on your shoulder, and start carrying it up the mountain again. This is your job. Pick it back up every day, over and over again. And so one of the things I've been telling people is that this is not, sometimes people on Instagram will say you need a mindset change. You just got to change your mindset, and then mindset fix, and then you're good. And I'm sorry, this is not that. This is not that. And it is peace. It will give you peace. It will give you assurance. It is valuable. It is a comfort, right? What is your only comfort in life and in death? It is that. But I want to be honest with people, and I want them to know that society's still going to be poking them. It's still going to be saying, hey, pick up that boulder, go back up the hill. And so in the context of that passage, I'm trying to acknowledge, all right, there's no 5-step plan. There's no technique for fixing society. So what do we do? So how do we go about this? And kind of where I've landed on that is this idea that we need to, instead of another technique, we need to be people who have this radical, and from the world's perspective, an absurd hope in God and his provision. I don't know how society changes. I don't know how it improves, but I do believe that God is a God who can radically change things. And I think that we have an obligation to make spaces where we are mutually supporting each other. And we already have that built into our faith in churches, right? So what are we doing in our churches to mutually support each other? Are we doing that? Because I think that's going to allow us to be sustained long term. Because if we're doing this on our own, it's going to be very hard to bear this burden.